now we're going to move on to me. I'm going to swap hats. I hope you don't mind. Right. And I've been asked to talk about evacuations, but before I do that, I'm going to set the scene a little bit about what actually, and show you some photographs about what actually happened at Fukushima. Just sort of to, one picture's worth 1,000 words. Most people, certainly the media, have not really shown what happened at Fukushima. Go. There were 3, in fact probably 4 explosions. Everybody talks about meltdowns, 3 meltdowns, but there were about 4 explosions. Next one, this is one of them. And this is the damage done to a number of the reactors. This is Unit 4 here, the one, and this is Unit 3. Sorry, I've lost my pointer. Here. The previous explosion that you saw was resulted in the damage here. Those units are still in a dilapidated state. They're mostly covered up right now to hide the fact that the water is being pumped into them to keep the fuel from remelting. Okay, next slide, please. This shows you the extent of the radioactive fallout, and these are cesium-137 levels. The magenta color is high levels, above 5 millisieverts per annum, and the dark green ones are below 5 millisieverts, from about 1 to 5. Now the key thing is, this is Tokyo Bay. And those people who say that Tokyo didn't get it, well, no, of course it got it. Indeed, Naoto Kan, the prime minister at the time, wanted to evacuate Tokyo. Well, he was dissuaded not to, and the main reason why is because it's impossible to evacuate a city, metropolitan area of 30 million people. You just can't do it. It'd just be crazy. And I'm going to refer to that later on. Next slide, please. Fukushima is the yellow circle here, and you can sort of see the world there. And this is the total deposition of cesium in terms of kilobecquerels per square meter, and it goes right around the world. I use this slide because the Americans often say, oh, no. Fukushima didn't affect America. Well, it certainly did, as you can see, particularly the West Coast. But it also affected the whole world. Next slide, please. That was air, a deposition from the air releases. This is deposition in the sea. This is Hawaii here. And you can see the extent of the cesium pollution in the Pacific Ocean. This is about the year after Fukushima. Okay, next slide, please. I know that Rika said 2.3 million bags, but I got a figure of 29 million bags.
Yeah.
Well, you can.
Is
it 29? Right. Well, this is the topsoil that they're scraping off huge areas of Fukushima Prefecture and just dumping the bags. There we go, 3 high. Each is a cubic meter, roughly speaking, at 140,000 sites. Well, this is crazy. I'm going to give you a little quick test. How long do you think the life is of one of these bags? How long are they designed to last? Any guesses?
The bag itself.
3 years.
Sorry?
The bag itself.
The bag itself.
3 years.
The year? Just 10
What?
minutes.
1 year?
3.
Well,
3 years.
Rick is right, 3 years. In other words, this is mind-bogglingly stupid. It really is. But this is what the government is doing. It's determined to show that life will go on. But the thing is that the radioactivity hasn't declined at all. Go on, next slide, please. This is a slide showing that the cesium and strontium, the 2 main radionuclides involved, and this is still being dumped into the sea. And every day, 300 tons, in fact it's gone up since this slide, is being dumped into the Pacific Ocean. Where is this coming from? It's coming from the cooling water used to keep the contents of the reactors from melting again. So they got the accident is still happening. You got the huge amount of water being dumped into the three stricken reactors to keep the fuel cool, the fuel which is melted down, keep it from re-melting again. And nobody talks about it, but this is exactly what's going on. Look at the next slide, please. So in a nutshell, there was 4 explosions, fuel fire in Unit 4, there was 3 core meltdowns in 1, 2, 3. About 12,000 workers got really high radiation exposures. By high, over 500 millisieverts and so on. 160,000 civilians were evacuated, of which 2,000 died. 8% of Japan's land area was contaminated, and well, estimated cost, well, you can pluck a figure out of the air. I've seen a US figure at 500 billion, but it's probably higher than that. Next slide. Right, I'm going to talk now about evacuations. I'm not going to show any slides because nobody took any photographs of the evacuations. Think about it for a second. The actual experience of the evacuations at Fukushima was just terrible, shocking. Myself and Liz and Rick and Jane, 4 of us went to Japan twice, 2015, 2016, to Fukushima to see firsthand what actually happened and speak to local mayors, local health committees, local women's committees, local election committees, to hear what they said. And what the stories they told us were just shocking. Anybody who says, oh no, we can evacuate all right, everything will be okay in a day, they're talking through a hole in their head. It is basically, evacuations are utterly impractical. And the bigger the city, the worse it becomes. Fukushima was a largely rural area, a lot of farms, arable farms. But let me tell you what happened there was that when the order for evacuations went out, it took about a month for most of the people to be evacuated, a month. During that time, there was chaos. I'll give you an example of that. The local parents were driving to the school to pick up the school children. At the same time, the school children were in buses trying to find their parents. Massive accidents. There were roadblocks lasting days. The traffic jams were so serious that the emergency workers at Fukushima had to be helicoptered in and out. The phone network completely went down, water works went down, electricity, gas, TV station, everything ceased to happen, to operate. Local farmers were told to evacuate. They objected, said no, they couldn't because they had to milk the cows. You know what happens with dairy cows, if you don't milk them, they die with pain. You have to milk the cows. The farmers were told, shut up and leave. So the farmers went around and killed their flocks, and then they killed themselves. At least in a dozen cases. Well, just saying this is fairly horrible. And yet the government in this country and in many other countries say that evacuations are feasible. Rubbish. In other words, they're misleading in a very bad way. Give you another example. There's not much written about it, and I did do some studies, but after the evacuations in Fukushima, of about 160,000, of which 80,000 were people who left under their own steam, took them about a month to do it, and about 80,000 who were in hospitals and schools and prisons and central institutions, so to speak. They were forcibly evacuated. But in many cases, such was the panic that people just had who were in hospital just had their drips ripped out and were bundled into school buses or whatever and driven out of the area. and they died. Because the area where they went to, the makeshift shelter, didn't have any facilities. Why? Because the doctors fled, the nurses fled, the firefighters fled, the police fled, because they were terrified of radiation. You say we could do an orderly evacuation? Nah, it's crazy, just crazy. In the United States in 1979, at 3 Mile Island, after the explosion occurred and the release of radioactive gases, the local health authorities went on the radio and asked for pregnant women and children mothers with children under the age of 3 to please leave. Do you know what happened? Now, Harrisburg, 3 Mile Island, or 3 Mile Island area, it's mostly farms. There's hardly any population at all. Well, what happened was that 140,000 people immediately jumped in the cars and fled the area and created massive traffic jams, big accidents, and nobody could leave, including the people who were most vulnerable, the children and pregnant women. That actually happened. So how do you stop people? What is the routine now? Well, there's not many areas to give you an example, but let me tell you about the city of Toronto. It is under a serious situation. It's got 6 big reactors about 25 kilometers from downtown Toronto. I'll repeat that. 6 big nuclear reactors about 25 kilometers, which is, what, 15 miles from downtown. It's actually in metropolitan Toronto. Okay. This is crazy, it really is. So anyway, they've had to do emergency procedures, draw up emergency procedures, but they're very quiet about evacuations. And because really, with a population of 6 million, they can't really evacuate Toronto. I am Canadian, by the way, and I've lived in Toronto for many years, and I've got many friends and relatives there. And I went over and spoke to them, and they said, Ian, the traffic is so bad now, ordinarily, that we couldn't handle any more traffic. And so I said, well, what's going to happen? They're going to go on radio and TV and say, well, look, we want this area, the plume's going this way, we want this area to be evacuated. There's going to be mass panic. Everybody would jump in the cars, first thing. Even though they're told not to, how are you going to stop them? And if anything, and what we saw at Fukushima and 3 Mile Island, big accidents, people running amok, people shooting each other. So anyway, it just isn't going to work. So I don't think that, I don't know what's going to happen. One other thing I should say is that 2000, according to statistics, official Japanese government statistics, over 2,000 people died, mostly old people, from the effects of the evacuations themselves. 2,000 people. Wow. And these were people, basically elderly people, who were uprooted from their families, from their homelands, shunted about, and they were disoriented, and in many cases they lost the will to live. They couldn't handle being in an area where they didn't know anybody, and they just said no and stopped eating. Now, the number of suicides, well, it's difficult to tell. The Japanese cabinet said 50 suicides between 2011 and 2013, 50. Well, since then, I think there's been more, according to what we found out. So this is a terrible situation. A number in Financial Times yesterday, there was a big long article by someone who should know better, saying, no, what we do is we don't evacuate. That's what he said. And, well, basically he doesn't know what he's talking about. The thing is that evacuations are needed because they do save people's lives. To give you an example, the WHO and UNSCARE, these are big international UN organizations dealing with radiation, they estimated that, roughly speaking, 5,000 people are going to die in future from the radiation exposures here at Fukushima, 5,000 in future. If there hadn't been evacuations, that number would have doubled. In other words, 10,000 would have died. God almighty. So 5,000 if you don't evacuate, 2,000 if you do evacuate. Oh, that's a horrible choice. Horrible. And people have asked me, I've got quite a few emails now saying, well, what do we do? And I say, you look at where the problem arises. Where does the problem arise? Because there's a nuclear power station. If you shut them down beforehand, you don't have to make that choice. That's by far the safest, sanest option. But of course, those people who are in government and who work for DBEIS, who are fully committed to nuclear power, throw up their hands in horror, say, no, no, you can't have that. No, that's not an option. Well, of course it's an option. It's a political option. Indeed, in 2016 election, the Conservative Party manifesto did not, on energy policy, did not mention the word nuclear. Talked about a balanced energy program. It never used the word nuclear. The people who were responsible for that have been summarily sacked from the Conservative Party. Nicholas Timothy and his colleagues. But anyway, that's a long story. So it is an option. We can do without nuclear. Okay, that's enough of talking. I'm going to go on to the next thing. Just very quickly. People, just be a second, Steve. Nobody knows about the fact that that in 1986, this was the pollution that put out, or the radioactive contamination put out at Chernobyl, which is, there you can see Chernobyl there. It covered 40% of the land area of Europe. This is cesium 137 levels. You can see it, the legend at the top left. I used to get a lot of emails from people who complain about George Monbiot. And they would say, what can we do about it? And George Monbiot, he's a maverick. He writes very socially incisive articles in The Guardian, but he also supports nuclear power. And after Fukushima, he supported it even more, which is crazy. And people emailed me and said, what shall we do? And I say, what you do is you send George this map and ask for his comments. Now, I don't know whether that works or not. It's hard to say, but this is outrageous. This is incredible. Okay, next slide, please. And this is iodine. Not very much known about it. Fukushima is towards the dark area here. Next slide, please. This is Britain. This is what happened in 1986. 1st of May, 1986. This is the contamination levels particularly along the west coast. Hands up those who know which part of the country got it worst. Yeah?
Wales, I think.
As well as Wales, there's another place. And my other place was, sorry? Sellafield. What irony. And the reason why they knew was that they measured the cesium 134 and 137 levels, the ratios, and they could tell it came from Sellafield. Okay? They could tell it came from Chernobyl, I beg your pardon. But that's another thing. I said, this is what happened here. There's a famous professor called Professor Geraldine Thomas. Hands up those who've heard of Geraldine Thomas. She's bête noire of the pro-nuclear people, who is not a very intelligent person. And she went on BBC and denied that the Chernobyl cloud had reached Britain. There, evidence exactly the opposite. Next slide, please. Now, what I did was that I asked a friend of mine, Pete Roach in Edinburgh, to plot down on Sizewell here the radioactive cloud that came out of Chernobyl on the same scale. Got it? So it's a Chernobyl cloud, Chernobyl fallout pattern, transposed to Britain, same scale and the same direction. And that is what happened. And now, so when we talk about evacuation zones, and there's talk about 20 kilometers or 30, wow, come on, covers almost the whole of the middle of England. And this slide is also, next slide please, Liz.
Ian, can you tell us what pink means on that graph there?
Sorry, tell people what?
There's an area coloured pink. What does the...
That's the fallout. That is the fallout from...
Level.
Oh, right. Okay, can we go back? These are roughly, I haven't got a legend here, very roughly, the red would be about 400 kilobecs per square meter. The purple would be about 100. I'm just relying on memory here. The pink would be about 50 kilobecs per square meter. Cesium-137, okay?
Can you tell us how many millisieverts people are going to get?
Okay. If you were living in these areas and you were downwind and it was actually in the pink areas or the red areas, you would be receiving, roughly speaking, in the red areas about 100 millisieverts from the passage, in the first year, from the passage of the plume and the deposition on ground. The conversion from kilobecs per square meter to some of the dose from the first year is not straightforward. You have to model it, and you have to explain what all your assumptions you're using. But you can see that there are quite a few nuclear power stations. The one up at the top of in Wales there is now closed, Wylfa, but all the rest are still, that I've got there are still running. Oh, so this one here is closed too. But the rest are still there. What's the next slide? Is Sue Ruff here by any chance? Oh, hello, Sue. I want to credit Sue for suggesting that I put this slide up. These are the power stations at Dungeness, and up there, the top one is at Sizewell. And the when you're talking about evacuations, you have to say, well, how far do we evacuate out to? The orange, the deep orange here is 30 kilometers. Sorry, I beg your pardon, 20 kilometers. This is the darker orange one is 50, and the lighter yellow is 100 kilometers. And here we are in London today. So you can see that if anything, heaven forbid, happened at Dungeness and there was a plume, it could easily go 100 kilometers to London. Put it this way, London was affected by Chernobyl, and Chernobyl is 2,500 kilometers away. Okay. And if you were to ask me the question, Ian, how far will the plume go? We don't know. It depends on the wind direction and the wind strength, and whether it rains or not. Rain causes the fallout to hit the ground. Next slide, please. Well, all of that, to me, suggests that we shouldn't really be going down the nuclear road, but as you heard from Catherine West, we are going down. The British government is going down that route. And I would say that, and I'm finishing on this, that the governments that are unable to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. Those are the words of George Santayana, who died in the mid-50s. Next slide. And we've got a choice ahead of us about whether we want a radioactive future, and the next slide, or whether we want a renewable one. Thank you very much.
So do we have any quick, concise questions? Yes, at the back, please.
Yeah. I'm interested in the topic of how many people died from Fukushima disaster. People on the street keep telling me nobody died from Fukushima. In fact, a woman told me that on Sunday. She said she was a physicist. Some people say, oh, people died, but it was only because of the evacuation. They didn't die. If they hadn't been evacuated, they wouldn't have died. So presumably if nobody had been evacuated, nobody would have died. These statements are obviously nonsense, aren't they?
Well, the thing is that the figures that I give you of over 2,000 are official Japanese statistics, right? They're published. And on my website, there are the references for you. The thing about how many people will die or will not die has to do with how many cancers will arise in the future. Right? Now, cancers take a while to arise. So what's happening right now is the Japanese government is saying, oh, look, nobody died, because, well, it takes a while for the cancers to appear, sometimes decades. But my reaction is, well, no, they've already died from necessary evacuations. They died. And by the way, according to the contacts we had, 4 soldiers were actually killed during the explosions, 4. And on the USS Ronald Reagan, 9 sailors are known to have died as a result of radiation exposures from the radioactivity which engulfed the ship. You have to explain. USS Ronald Reagan was a big Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, gigantic thing, 120,000 tons or so. And it was sent to Fukushima to help. It was actually on its way to Tokyo anyway. And it was sent to help with operations at Fukushima, in particular trying to get pumps over there. The trouble was that it anchored offshore, and the fallout, which they couldn't see, drifted right over the ship and landed on the ship and contaminated the whole ship. And there are, by the way, there are a number of 2 or 3 dozen lawsuits as a result of that going on right now, where the plaintiffs are claiming that about 9 sailors died from, not from the cancers, but because if you get high enough doses, it'll kill you. But you have what we call deterministic effects, cell-killing effects. Basically, you get such a whopping dose, I'm talking about 500 millisieverts, 1,000 millisieverts, 2 sieverts, that your body goes all wonky, and you have persistent bleeding from every orifice in your body, your hair falls out, you go into dizzy spells, you become incontinent, you're continually vomiting, and there were a number of deaths from that, including from rare blood diseases, what people had never seen before, because these are huge, these are very, very large radiation doses. Those are called deterministic effects. What I'm talking about with cancers are what they call stochastic effects. These are using fancy words, but shall we say long-term effects, delayed effects, okay? And the thing is that with the deterministic effects, you can see them right away, bang, these people have been badly affected, but it's not very many people. Whereas with fallout, you're talking about tens of thousands of people who would die over the long-term future. But the Japanese government is very misleading and says, no, well, we can't see any cancer, so. Yeah.
Okay, so you say that, you say 9 sailors died, yeah? Was it 9 sailors that died?
Yes.
So if 9 sailors died directly from radiation poisoning, which is effectively what you're saying, that's what, about 5,000 sailors on one of those aircraft carriers? Now all the others must have received very severe and debilitating...
On board the ship?
Exactly.
Yes. They did.
There's lots of suing going on.
Well, you'd imagine there'd be a lot more than 20 court cases.
Well, I didn't say 20.
Oh, right.
There are hundreds as far
Hundreds,
as
I see, fair enough.
What they tend to do is have class actions. And the number who are in the class actions varies from 200 to 300. And,
An early example of, the aircraft carrier was the Lucky Dragon incident in 1953, when the fishermen on the sailing boat, the Lucky Dragon fishing boat, they all died of contamination, in fact. very quickly.
Shall I-
That was
shall I-
1953.
Shall I explain what to the rest of the people here what happened? There was atomic bomb tests in the 50s and 60s, which released huge amounts of radioactivity into the atmosphere. And a number of them were near Japan, near Guam, and which I couldn't remember, can't remember the name of the islands now. But anyway, the fallout from one of the
Marshall Islands.
Thank you. Bless you. Fallout from the Marshall Islands tests fell on the unlucky crew of a little fishing ship called the Lucky Dragon, and contaminated them so badly that they all died. That was 1953.
I think we probably need to.
Yeah, sorry.
I think, I'm sorry, we're going to have to call a halt there because we need, there's time for 3 more speakers
Who's
yet.
next?